Welcome everyone to the AI and the SDLC webinar. My name is Manish Lemay. I'm a Senior Vice President here with Aleda over marketing and brand strategy. We're excited to talk about how we've used AI within the entire software development lifecycle to transform and build solutions for our clients. Before we jump in, let me share a little bit of information with all of you about the firm. So for those of you that have not heard of us, Aleda is a global AI consulting firm guiding our clients towards digital excellence. We're composed of former IT leaders and consulting professionals that understand the digital landscape. We're able to deliver outstanding results and ultimately help our clients craft unique experiences and drive revenue. We've got 4 sets of services on the left-hand side. Today, we're going to be talking about our AI services, specifically creating custom solutions that cross the boundaries of experience, strategy, tech, and data. We've also got 3 critical parts of our business as well that we support clients with around strategy and experience, technology and cloud, and data and insights. The firm itself was founded 9 years ago, and for those of you that are curious, Aleda is a type of bamboo. That's how we came up with the name for the firm. We're on 4 continents. We've got over 350 consulting professionals and growing, and we give 1% of our net income back to local communities. Today, we've got a couple of fantastic speakers lined up. We've got David Romeo. He's our VP of Innovation. He'll be taking us through the first part of the discussion around AI and how we've been able to use it in different parts of the SDLC, and then he'll hand it over to Mac Cope. Mac is a Senior Director in our Tech and Cloud practice. He'll take us through a real client example and show how we've been able to utilize AI specifically for that client in different parts of the SDLC. We want this to be an open dialogue today. There are quite a few folks that have signed up for this webinar. If you've got questions, there's a Q&A panel button at the bottom of the Zoom interface. Feel free to put questions in there. We've also got time baked in at the end of each of our sections to field questions, and I'll be facilitating that. So with that, I will hand it off to David Romeo.
Awesome. Thank you, Manish. Pleasure to be here with everybody. And as Manish said, please, if you've got questions, submit them through the platform. We'll try to get to all of the questions in a couple of sections as we go through AI and the SDLC and then the client example that Mac is going to show. I think to get started, it's important to kind of baseline on where we are and how AI is fundamentally reshaping the software development lifecycle. Over the past 18 months, most organizations have experimented with AI. That's GitHub Copilot here, a ChatGPT there. But today we're going to discuss something more strategic, which is how to move from experimentation to systematic integration that's going to drive real, measurable business outcomes. We're going to keep this conversation, though, at more of an executive level. We're going to focus on time, cost, quality, and competitive advantage, while we're trying to give you some concrete examples, or enough concrete examples to really understand how this works in practice. So let's start with what the data tells us about where we are and where we're headed. The numbers here tell a powerful story about both the opportunity and the urgency. So first, the opportunity. Industry analysts are seeing a 25 to 30% productivity gain across the SDLC when AI is properly integrated. That's not theoretical. It's happening today. We'll show you some examples. We'll talk about some of our statistics. But organizations have started to move beyond experimentation. But here's what really should get your attention. Gartner's reporting that 90% of enterprise software engineers will be using AI code assistants by 2028. There's no better proof than that than the Gemini 3 launch today and some of their anti-gravity IDE tools that they just released. That's just today. Just for reference, this is up from less than 14% in early 2024. So we're witnessing one of the fastest adoptions of software, of technology in software engineering history. This is faster than cloud. It's faster than agile. I mean, these are all experiences I think most of us have lived through, and this is breakneck speed. At the task level, though, McKinsey research is showing specific impacts. Documentation is being completed in half the time. New code is being written in nearly half the time. And refactoring is done in nearly 2/3 of the time. So if we think about what this means, your competitors could potentially deliver features twice as fast at lower cost with better quality. That's not a marginal improvement. That's a fundamental shift in competitive dynamics. So let's notice the key phrase though at the top. Most organizations are still experimenting, something we just talked about. The tools exist, the gains are proven, but the gap is in systematic adoption. So organizations that close this gap first are going to have that sustained competitive advantage. So what happens when you move beyond experimentation? What are those actual business benefits? So when we inject AI systematically into the SDLC, we're going to see improvements in three critical areas that I think every executive is going to care about: time, economics, and quality. So first, time. AI enables more efficient planning and estimation by analyzing historical data and patterns. So from that, we can see less development time in many different areas, because those repetitive tasks are automated and developers are going to be focused on the high value work. The result is faster time to market for new features and products. In competitive markets, this speed advantage alone justifies an investment. On the economic side, we're seeing reduced total development costs, not just from efficiency, but from avoiding rework and technical debt. Features reach production faster. That's going to mean accelerated benefit realization. You start getting value sooner. And critically, AI is going to help reduce that technical debt by enforcing patterns and standard consistency. And on the quality side, AI brings predictability through standards. Every piece of code, every piece of documentation, every requirements document is going to follow the best practice. We're going to see fewer bugs and vulnerabilities because AI is going to help assist humans in things that they may miss. And we're going to get superior documentation and knowledge management, which reduces that key person risk and accelerates onboarding. So here's a concrete example from our own work. After 2 sprints with our own AI tooling, and a Aleda dev team, in fact, actually Max dev team here, experienced increased velocity by 75%, from 44 points to 77 points per sprint. This is the same team, same scope. They've already been working in the application. It's just a fundamentally a better way of working. So let's look at how exactly we achieve those benefits across the entire development lifecycle. You all have probably all seen a wheel that somewhat represents the standard SDLC, something that looks somewhat like this: requirements, planning, technical design, develop and validate, release, support, and maintain. Our approach is very straightforward but powerful. We embed AI into each phase of this lifecycle, not as a separate tool, but an integrated capability with proper governance and human oversight. At each stage, AI is context aware. It's going to know where your project architecture and constraints are. It's collaborative. It's augmenting, not replacing human judgment. And it's observable, which is the most important. All outputs are reviewable, testable, and traceable. We're going to walk you through each of these phases so you can see what it looks like in practice. So when we start with requirements, many projects lose time here and clarity before they even begin. We have some custom AI assistant tooling that ingests meeting transcripts, project contexts, and user prompts that help generate draft user stories and acceptance criteria. But here's the key. The team is going to lead the refinement of the AI output. That's bringing in the nuance and business priority that only humans can provide. The approach is going to enable asynchronous backlog refinement, so stakeholders can contribute when convenient, and the AI maintains consistency across all of the stories. When we think about it from an outcome standpoint, what you're going to get is clearer scope definition, faster stakeholder alignment, and fewer costly misunderstandings between business and IT, which can send any team back to the drawing boards if that is discovered way too late. So once the requirements are clear, we then move to planning. On the planning side, in the planning phase, our project leadership uses the AI to quickly generate artifacts. That's things like project charters, communication plans, but more importantly, the AI assistant provides round-the-clock project context to the entire team. Mac is going to talk a little bit about what this means with geographically distributed teams, but team members can ask questions like, what are the dependencies for this feature? What was decided about authentication? They're going to get immediate, accurate answers based on actual project documents, not generic internet content. That's going to lead to more consistent project execution, faster team onboarding, which is key, especially in longer running projects, and fewer surprises that are going to derail those timelines and budgets. So with a plan in place, we now need to think about the technical design. This is where most folks tend to see AI being introduced beforehand, but let me just take a second to pause and say it's really important to understand how requirements and planning feed into technical design. Here we've got agentic tooling that's going to help perform rapid research across a lot of solution approaches, whether that's technologies and frameworks or internal documentation and integration strategies. Instead of architects spending days comparing options or trying to deliberate on different approaches, AI is going to quickly surface the trade-offs, the reference architectures, and the relevant standards. Now, again, remember, all of this is based off of factual, relevant data that exists within the ecosystem. And if that sounds impossible, Mac is going to show you some of the tooling that we use to be able to make that possible. AI is going to generate initial workflows and diagrams. Those might be sequence diagrams, data flows, integration maps. But here's the key, something I said earlier. Architects are going to validate and refine rather than starting from scratch. So what that does is that creates a better informed design, so those decisions are able to be made faster. You're going to get comprehensive documentation that's going to be created as a natural byproduct. Now, where most people first think of AI is where we head next, which is development and testing. There's a lot we could say here. There's a lot of words that have already been spilled for this. But in the develop and validate phase, that's where developers are delegating coding tasks to AI. I think we're at a point right now where we've proven, especially internally, that AI can be more than an assistant, especially on boilerplate and certain integrations and repetitive patterns. Now, the key is setting up that context, and the other key is having all of the aforementioned steps planned out and that data being relevant to those AI tooling in that context. So the AI assistant's going to get instant project-specific answers and be able to make those decisions. So back to the how does our authentication work? That's based off of the code that exists in the code base. Show me examples of our API patterns might be a combination of code and documentation that exists. These types of things are going to help dramatically reduce the time developers spend searching and asking questions, which we know will absolutely take a developer out of their workflow and contribute to some of the increase in time and costs. So the outcome is you're going to get higher development throughput with better test coverage and a process that's going to scale more easily across teams. So getting code into production and keeping it running is where many organizations struggle. And this is where AI can help too. So when we think about release, we also need to think about supporting and maintaining this. This is where agentic coding tools really can help us create infrastructure as code and deployment pipelines, again, kind of tapping into some of the existing processes and tooling that already exists that make releases more repeatable and reliable. But when we start to think about what comes after that, supporting and maintaining, AI really is going to help understand and accelerate issue identification and resolution. It can help analyze logs and suggest fixes, helps team members ramp up faster by providing that context and access to the decisions and historical decisions and architectural decisions. And it helps keep that documentation current, which is usually something that gets neglected, especially after a root cause analysis. So what this does is this helps to lower support costs, reduce downtime, and help create less dependencies on tribal knowledge. That's the issue we typically see when knowledge is what walks out the door when people leave. So let me show you this all together as one holistic framework. So here's the complete picture of how AI can enhance the SDLC. Requirements, where you get AI-generated stories from real stakeholder input. You've got planning, where AI-assisted project artifacts can create on-demand knowledge bases. Technical design for AI-driven research and diagram generation. Develop and validate, which is including agentic coding and automated testing today. Releases, which is going to be where AI-generated infrastructure and pipelines really come into place. And then finally, support and maintain, where you're going to get faster issue resolution and living documentation. If you notice the pattern, AI isn't a sidecar or an afterthought. It's embedded in the workflow. So humans remain accountable for decisions, but the heavy lifting of creation and documentation is augmented by AI. When implementing this with clients, though, we start incrementally, typically with requirements and development where ROI is fastest. We then establish governance and metrics, then expand across the lifecycle. So for executives, the key takeaway is this. This isn't about chasing shiny new tools. It's about systematically using AI to improve throughput, quality, and risk management in how your organization builds software. I think with that, we have a little bit of time for some questions.
There have been a couple of questions around specific metrics that we've been able to realize based on particular clients we've worked with, and Mac's going to be all teed up and ready to show a few graphs on what we've seen firsthand based on utilizing AI. And then, as David mentioned towards the end of his slide, huge advocates of human in the loop, and hopefully you all got a sense for that. Hasn't gone away. It's baked throughout the SDLC that David covered, and how we're utilizing AI to speed things up and deliver value. There is a question from Michael around there are 1,000 tools out there. How do we narrow down to certain tools that work together for each phase of the SDLC? Is that something y'all want to answer now, or do you think we'll cover it as we go through the specific example that Mac's going to cover?
I think we'll cover, I mean, Mac's example is going to be phenomenal to illustrate some of the real tools that we use on a real technology stack, building a mobile application for a client. I don't want to steal Mac's thunder on that, but I will say that is a hard problem nowadays. What's interesting about this is AI has moved so fast in the last several years that some of the standards around integration or tools working together isn't as coherent as what you might see in a fully mature and baked ecosystem. That doesn't mean that you can't or shouldn't use some of those tooling. What's interesting about this is the standards that have emerged around, agent to agent and MCP are things that are kind of the keywords you want to look for in a lot of the tooling to make sure that they're going to be compatible with each other. But ultimately, at the end of the day, while we've automated end-to-end a lot of the capability using some of our own proprietary tooling, and that's tooling we bring to clients and things we can talk about in what we call our AI accelerator context. Mac is going to show some of that. Everything that I just talked about could be done, as I hate to call it a manual integration, but being able to take and provide that context for AI from one step to the other to the other. So there's nothing precluding you from picking the best of breed tools out of the gate, or the tools that you are comfortable with or available to your enterprise and organization, and seeing how they fit together.
Yeah, fantastic, David. Michael, we'll show you the tools we used for this particular client story. And certainly if you've got follow-up questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. With that, we'll hand it over to Mac.
Awesome.
Alrighty. Let's talk a little bit about a specific example. You talked about the theory, and I'm sure this has been on a lot of people's minds. How do we go about actually implementing this? I want to tell you about a project I've been working on over the past year called SportsMo. SportsMo is a startup, and it was designed to capitalize on funding opportunities created by NIL and the House settlement that recently happened in the US. The platform, the goal was to gamify donations to college athletic programs and create an engaging way for college sports fans to support their schools. So the founder that brought this to us wanted to have a live engagement component, right? How do we enable real-time donations based on game events as they happen? In this case, with football, there's a number of things happening in football. How do we tie those to giving? Also, how do we enable that across a number of different schools? We ended up supporting 136 schools out of the gate. And then another interesting challenge with it was to deliver an MVP by the start of the 2025 college football season. And we were just beginning at the start of 2025. So it was a very interesting challenge that was brought to us. We spent about 6 weeks at the end of 2024 going through a product sprint, validating some assumptions, helping the founder go from his concepts, his ideas into a more refined approach, and we started development in early 2025. So let's talk about the outcome. As we think about the challenge that was ahead of us, we were able to deliver the iOS and Android apps in about 7 months, which as the leader of the project, I was concerned about meeting that deadline. Anytime that there's a close deadline that you want to meet and a lot of features you want to put in, there's concern. And the platform was released on time. It enables micro donations of $1 or more, tied to live game events, all the things that were requested, social group mechanics, and real-time play-by-play. The way we were able to do this, as you can expect, was through AI assisted development. It roughly doubled our sprint velocity and reduced our time to market. We were even able to, do some key refactoring, take in input from end users, and refine our user experience. The technology this was built on, we had Flutter for cross-platform development, .NET API is the backend infrastructure. Inside of Azure, multiple Azure services were used for it. We used SignalR for real-time communication, and we had StatsPerform, which is an API that provides live game data, Stripe for payment processing, Auth0 for authentication, and Singular for mobile ad attribution. And for AI tools, I know that question came up earlier. What kind of AI tools do we use to enable this? We used our internal AI accelerator, which I'll say was pretty nascent at the time. At the beginning of 2025 is when we were really still working on the foundation of that, and it's grew along with us as we developed this product. We also utilize a tool called RuCode, which is an agentic coding plugin to Visual Studio Code that allows us to choose different LLM models to be able to delegate code tasks to the LLMs. And we used a number of different models over the course of the year. As you can imagine, those who've been following LLMs closely, models have gotten a lot better even over the course of 2025. So some of the models that were key to our process were Claude Sonnet 3.7, Claude Sonnet 4 as it came out, GPT-4.1, GPT-5, and we continue to add on to those as new models come out and become available. With that, I want to show you an example of how we use our AI accelerator. I'm not going to go into the coding side just because there's a lot of complexity there, and that's also a lot more well known. So I wanted to focus on some of the front end of that process and give you an example of how we employ the planning portion. So with that, we'll pull up our AI accelerator and give you an example. So I'll give you an overview of the tool once I kick it off. But generally what we're dealing with here is we have, I've put in an image that came from our UX designer, a little bit more background in Sportsmo. We've done, college football, and that's ongoing, but now we're getting ready to release college basketball. So I have a mock-up that I've added in here. You can see the thumbnail there. I've added that in. I've added a prompt, and you'll notice the prompt is pretty small. And I'll explain why that is as we go through this. And I'm going to kick this off. And as I do so, we'll explain a little bit. So as the AI assistant is going through, I want to talk a little bit about what AI assistant means to us. So we have these capabilities in our internal tool called personas, which can range from a simple chatbot, AI assistant, and it can, to our agentic research bot, which goes through and does deep research on the topics that we ask it to. We also have the concept of a data product, which you can see the tools using a data product right now. You can think of a data product as a set of curated context that we provide to the AI so that it can provide good output to us. As an example of that, we gave it a number of different requirements around how we want to set up our user stories. So the user story that I've asked it to create, it went through and it followed that pattern. And when it finishes here, I'll show you what that looks like. Well, the interesting thing here that we can highlight is that we were able to curate a context that includes things like API documentation, team uh, standards, whether they be coding standards or user story standards, architectural standards, and so forth. So, one of the things that David mentioned earlier was that we really spend a lot of time across the board with the activities around planning and user and backlog generation and backlog creation and refinement and all of that goes along with that. These types of tools were able to take our team and accelerate us really quickly. We actually didn't even have a dedicated BA on this team. We had a UX designer and we had a technical lead who worked together to do the user stories. It was really interesting to see how that worked, and this tool really enabled that. So as you can see here, the output's complete. We have a user story that basically is talking about the integration with live game data. So that's what we're working on now, is integrating live data from college basketball. So you can see it has a description. We wanted to have a description, acceptance criteria, tech notes. And what's really powerful about this is because of our data product and the information we have, which includes information about the API we're integrating with, it has a lot of out of the box value for us. So you can see here's the endpoints we need to call for men's college basketball, women's college basketball, parameters that we need to send in, how we authenticate, data requirements, and approaches that go beyond just the general story. And this takes examples from our database schema, which our AI assistant is aware of, and gives some ideas around that. So how this would work in practice is, someone would go in and generate the user story, and that'd take us about 80% of the way there. And you can see there's a lot of really good detail in here. And if I were to do this myself, or one of our other team members do this themselves, it takes several hours to go through, identify the specific endpoints, go through, look at our database schema, put some suggestions in there, and you can imagine all the benefits that you get in the shortening of that timeline as you have this assistant helping you out. So with that, what we would do from this point is we'd take this, we'd put it into our task tracking software in GitHub, and we'd refine it with the team, right? And a lot of times this happened asynchronously, as was mentioned. With the details that it provided, our UX designer was able to, come up with a UX design, put it into a Latabot. It would go through, generate our user story. Then it could be reviewed by the technical lead. Technical lead would refine some things, give some feedback, and then it would be ready for the developers. Really exciting stuff and really powerful. And with that, one of the key things that I want to highlight as part of this, and I'll highlight this again a little bit later, is that context is key in this. Having the right context available to AI at the right time is the most important part of getting good results. A lot of people start out using AI and they don't get a good result. And it reminds me of back when I was learning to use Google, when Google was a new thing. You had to learn how to use it to get the right results that you want. And AI is the same way. And what's interesting about AI is that we have this tendency to treat it like oh, stuff, you're an expert, so figure it out. Well, the more context you provide, just like you would a team member, the better results that you're going to get. That said, I want to talk about a couple of the other tools that we used as well.
So just to sum it up, Mac, you had
Yeah,
if you all think back to David's wheel diagram, the very first step around requirements and the second step around planning, with the proper context, in this case, your prompt, the UI images, other information provided through the data product. The team basically used our AI collaboration platform that we affectionately call Latabot, or the AI Accelerator, to generate user stories that have this level of detail that you shared with us to build the first round of Sportsmo and what was deployed into the App Store back in, I think, September, maybe August or September. Does that
yeah,
sound
it
right?
was July, actually, end of July.
July. Okay. Yeah, fantastic. So again, just to bring it back to some of the previous content, this is not coding. It's really utilizing AI to meet the first, we'll call it one or two boxes in the software development cycle that David covered earlier.
Yeah, and as an example of what comes next after that, you know, you take and you provide that user story as input. So I took that user story as an example, put it as input, and using the data product, the other information, as an architect, I can go through and see, okay, what are the recommendations? How can we approach uh, a technical design, right? Again, these things build on each other as you go through and these different parts of the process. So definitely very valuable as we were going through the planning process, going through the technical design and into development. And with that, I want to highlight some parts of that. So we'll go back to the slides and we'll talk a little bit about the agentic coding tool that we used called RuCode. And as he's bringing those up, one of the things that we utilized, and let's go a couple slides in there, Romeo. There we go. Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah. So we also used a tool called RuCode. Now, keep in mind at the beginning of 2025, agentic coding tools were still quite nascent. There's a lot more out there today. We utilized RuCode. It was ahead of the others at the time, and it had a lot of benefits that we found really useful. So the question was asked earlier: how do you decide which tool to use? It's a matter of personal preference to a certain extent, but there's also some common things that are important to remember. Examples include, the ability to select multiple models. That's one of the things we love about RuCode. You can select multiple models. You just need an API key. You bring your own API key, you put it in, and the developer can utilize a number of different models. And with that, there's also different modes like architecting, asking, coding, right? And depending on those different modes, there's different benefits that the AI will bring to you. In the screenshot that we show here is an example where I used architect mode to create a game simulation engine to help us simulate college football games ahead of the season. That was one of the big challenges we had, and where AI helped us out a lot. We were able to come up with a game simulation engine in a matter of hours instead of what would have taken us probably a week to do. So really exciting stuff as we put all these tools together. And I want to talk about, okay, let's talk about the impact, right? We've shown an example of some of the tools. How did it impact the team? So we introduced these tools to the team at about the fourth sprint. So we started in late January, and about sprint 4, we were averaging around 40, 44 points, 45 points per sprint. And we introduced our AI assistant that I showed you. And with that AI assistant, we added context like API, documentation, the project standards, architecture, those types of things. And you can see that the team's velocity greatly increased just with that additional capability. We introduced RuCode in the latter end of sprint 5 and really started to see some of the benefits through that sprint and beyond as the team learned to utilize it better. So we ended up going from about 45 points per sprint to 90 points per sprint, which is about doubling the velocity. And the team was able to manage that. We're on, I think, sprint 20 now as we've gone through the process. And the team's even been able to get about as much done as we were before, but with half the team size. And one of the things that we talk about with AI, and this is a question I get all the time, how do you measure the success you're getting and the improvements you get with AI? This was one of the best opportunities I've had to measure it because we started the team kind of without AI, and then we introduced some targeted assistance and really focused hard on AI and saw the results here. But one of the things we also did was we surveyed the team. So we'll show that here. We asked the team a couple of different questions, right? We asked about the AI assistant. We asked about RuCode. And what was interesting, I expected RuCode to make the biggest difference, the agentic coding tools. But by far, the thing that people referred to the most was actually the AI assistant, and on the side that I wouldn't have expected, which is always interesting. They mentioned the AI assistant as having provided, 8 out of the 9 team members said that it had 20% or greater increase in their velocity by using that tool. And with Rue Code, similar results in, a good portion of the team seeing very high impact, some reporting significant impact. Others were not really using those tools because they weren't developing. But if we look at the overall results, we asked also about AI generally. So go to the next slide. And overall, the AI tooling combined in aggregate, 7 out of our team members said it would increase their velocity 20% or more. And we saw this in the team velocity. And even their own self-reporting was a little bit more conservative than what we actually saw in the results. So some really impressive gains as we applied these different tools. And it's really been exciting to see the results as we gone about and how it's continued and across other projects that we've done as well. So with that, I'll pause for a moment and we'll open it up for questions again.
Yeah, we've got some great ones for you, Mac and David. So let's just go through these. The first one says, in a perfect world, the SDLC is linear, but it often goes back and forth between scope, technical design, and development. One thing we run into is changing business rules and scope as we start the dev process and questions arise that need the business leaders to answer. Are there AI tools or techniques that we can use to help identify these issues earlier in the process with respect to the SDLC?
That's a great question. So one of the things I use AI for a lot in my workflows is to identify gaps in my thinking, identify gaps in my solutions. And that's one area where I think there's an opportunity to use AI. If you go through and it's aware of your backlog and has context of your project, you can start asking questions like, what's missing? What are the key risks? What are the things that we should probably refine? And that'll give you ideas. Now, it's not going to be perfect, right? There's still going to be uh, issues you run into, and it's not going to be a catch-all, but you can really leverage it to help you find gaps in your thinking and in your process. And that's where I would start. I don't know, Romy, if you have any other ideas.
The thing I'd add to that, and the reason that it works, because the other question that I get that's kind of similar to that is, how do you reduce the amount of hallucinations that AI can make, or how do you guard against that? Because in something like this, and what you're asking about, hey, identify gaps that I might not be thinking about, is if you went into ChatGPT today and you asked that, wildly about whatever document or process or whatever, you're going to get who knows what. Probably a lot of junk is what I would say. But what's key here, and the thing that I want everybody to take away from, is that we've grounded these models and these bots and personas and agents on our data. So that's the data for the Sports Mode project. That includes all of the documentation, the requirements, the decisions, and more importantly, the transcripts from all of the calls and requirement and design sessions and things like that. So there's a lot of curated context behind the scenes here that is being correlated together and supplied to these agents that have complete understanding and context of the goals that Mac is trying and team are trying to accomplish. And that is what has caused the hallucinations to essentially evaporate overnight. I mean, Mac, have you run into many situations where you've said this is just completely wrong, when it's grounded on your data, versus saying, actually, there's threads of truth here that we need to start to understand and go down?
I'll definitely say it's not perfect, and even human output isn't always perfect, right?
Right.
So I think we're at least at the human level. What's interesting though is you mentioned one of the key parts that we really focus on is curating the context in the right way. Anytime we get something that's kind of off, I think about what's wrong with my prompt, what's wrong with the context that I've provided, or have I provided too much context? And once we get those in check, we see those hallucinations drastically reduce to the point where, we get really consistent results.
Yeah, great. We've got a couple more before we jump to the next section. The next two I think go together. They're specifically about the AI accelerator platform, that collaborative platform that you were showing us, Mac. The first is that an internal Aleda tool that was built in-house? And then to go with that, are the LLMs contained or are they public models?
Yeah, I can cover that. So what you saw is AledaBot, which is a deployment of Aleda's AI accelerator framework that we have and we offer to our clients. What we identified early on in the journey, call it early 2023, is that we had specific ideas of how to apply AI to what we do best at the firm. All of the things that Manish mentioned at the very beginning that we do, we sat down and asked ourselves the question, how do we apply AI in all of these things? And what we found is that some of the tooling was either lacking or non-existent, or we had visions and point of views that was going to drag these products in different directions. So we sat down to create our internal tooling for that. And that what came out of that is what we call our AI accelerator. And so this is an offering that we have to clients. It is something we build internal, but it can be delivered and deployed into your environment. It's intended to run entirely self-contained in your cloud environment. It's not a SaaS product that we maintain for you. There's some interesting nuances and opportunities that come from that. And there's some offerings at the end here to do a deeper dive into that we'll cover before we wrap up today that Manish will talk a little bit about. So in a large way, this is an internal Aleda tool that was built in-house, but it's being leveraged by our clients to deliver real results in their environments and not in our environments. And so when we talk about models, one of the things that Mac didn't show is that we have the ability to connect to any model hosted by anybody anywhere. And so that's become phenomenally powerful for us. So when Mac was talking about some of the models that he was using, those are just a subset of the models that are able to be used in our platform. In fact, Gemini 3 was released today. We released that into our innovation environment in about 10 minutes after the public announcement was available. In fact, we had it deployed before the API was actually accepting requests on that. That's how fast it is to be able to do something like that. But Anthropic models, OpenAI models, open source models on Hugging Face, Bedrock, Vertex, AI Foundry, you name it, we can connect to it. Even on-premise local models can be utilized in certain capacities. So we are big fans of switching out models for the right task. And there's probably no better example than as you go through requirements to design to coding, different models are going to be good at different things. And that's important for us to understand, for y'all to understand, and to take advantage of, because there's no one size fits all that we've found in this ecosystem yet.
Great. Thanks for that, David. The final question before we keep going from Raymond around, I think it's for you, Mac, just how much effort was put into the football version? And then based on everything you shared with us and that step change chart, which I love on the velocity, how has that been able to impact and shorten the effort on the basketball version for Sportsmo?
It's a good question. So one of the things we didn't have when we started out, obviously, was a pattern. So we had to establish the patterns. And what we've seen with AI is the more you have established patterns, like for example, our agentic coding tool, Rue Code, is aware of the context inside of your repository. So it looks at your code repository. You can point it to examples and use those examples to help code your other solutions. And what I mentioned earlier is that we're operating with half the team size, and we've enabled basketball. And the team just told me this morning actually that they're a little ahead of where I expected them to be, which is super exciting. So we're seeing some of those benefits just from having done it already, and that adds to the context that AI can use, and the team has got better at leveraging the tools.
Great. So let's keep going to, I think lessons learned are next, right? Key learning.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So some of the key learnings here, and I've mentioned this before, but I wanted to highlight them. So speeding up your developers is just part of the equation. David mentioned this. It's really a point we like to drive home. You need a holistic approach to augment every part of your process. If you speed up your developers, they're going to get done and won't have anything to do unless you also augment your requirements gathering, your requirements definition and refinement. So having that augment every part of your process is really important. The next key lesson is context is key. Providing teams with an AI assistant that has the right context at the right time makes a huge impact, especially with distributed teams. Now, the sports mode team that we're talking about, we have people in the US, we have people in Latin America, and we have people in India. And the people in Latin America and India don't really know much about the sports, as you can imagine. In South America, they're more interested in football, or I should say soccer. And in India, they're more interested in cricket, right? But they don't know necessarily about our sports as much. So they were able to learn that and come up with that. And we were able to provide. Now, luckily, AI models are very aware of our sports, which is awesome. But we also provided other context around how it needed to work inside our model. And that updates from our meetings and decisions that are made make it available for those teams across context. And that's a huge impact to the teams where we had developers sitting idle because they weren't sure how to move forward. They could ask a question to an AI assistant, get a response right away, move forward with confidence. And then the last thing that I want to highlight is just the need for team members to have time and guidance to understand how to work with new AI tools. As I've onboarded multiple teams into AI, it's a learning curve, right? It's like I mentioned the Google example earlier. When you're learning a new tool, by default, it's a little awkward at first. You get bad results, and as you get better, you start to understand where it works well, which models work the best for what you're trying to do, which models work best for how you prompt, right? There's some of that comes to play as well. And what helped us as a team is to making a discussion about AI a part of our team meetings and discussions, like retrospectives, as an example, helped us share best practices and ensure consistent use across the team. Really important and really helped us make sure that we're upskilling ourselves, sharing best practices, and sharing wins. So natural next question becomes, how do I get started? And as was kind of mentioned earlier, there's no magic formula of how to get started, where to get started. What we recommend is you start with a targeted group of power users, right? Find people who are innovative, people who are some of your best folks who are forward looking, right? If you take those power users, they'll help ensure that you quickly iterate and figure out how to fit it into your organization with your specific constraints. From there, you can outline best practices, tools, approaches, and refine that over time. Use those power users to drive innovation and work towards the consistency across your teams and groups. And that's one thing we did. The sports mode team gave us kind of one of the first example use cases of how we can leverage AI across the whole team and make it effective. We took those learnings, the people went on to other projects and then did it in their teams. So same way it happened with Aleda, it can happen with your teams. And that's an important part to remember.
So as we wrap up here, a couple of things to note. We've talked about several of these, but we have invested heavily in the AI expertise and tooling needed to drive the efficiency that we're looking to deliver, as value to our clients. When you hear that Aleda is an AI first organization and we have an AI first approach, that's really incorporating several of the things Mac has said, has learned and has adopted as these onboarded teams. Some of this is the AI awareness and that capability that we've driven through our entire organization. I'm going to say something key here, though. It starts at the top. We would not be where we are from an AI first approach if our senior leadership, executive leadership, and even our CEO did not dive in head first to understand how best to utilize AI. Everybody else followed based off of that. We've also spent an inordinate amount of time ramping people up in what we call boot camps to be able to help them understand what's real, what's not, where the current state of AI is, and how best to utilize the tooling, as Mac has mentioned multiple times. That accelerator framework that you saw is our custom AI-based tooling. It can run on any cloud environment, Azure, and AWS being some of the premier cloud environments that we deploy. We can honestly leverage any LLM from any provider anywhere. It has a number of extensions and tools that reach into all of our operational systems, not just things like GitHub and Azure DevOps, but our time and expense system, our CRM, our financial systems, our Office 365 environment, et cetera. And what that's really done is that's allowed us to be able to create agentic AI and orchestration opportunities that leverage those core concepts that we call data products, that data. And that supports a variety of use cases all the way across the SDLC, but also operationally for our organization as well. We ask ourselves first, can we do it with AI before we look at anything else? And our experience is to eat our own dog food when it comes to an approach like this. So when we think about how best to deploy and utilize AI, we have to think about this in a comprehensive, really multidimensional approach. That's going to start with understanding what is that strategic value that we're going to be targeting. In some cases, it means redefining processes for, not just a human in the loop, but sometimes AI led with human supervised, different permutations of that. And that might mean that there are different technology approaches that we have to take. But ultimately, this is how we deliver for our clients the advanced technology, that deep expertise, and the partnerships that we have to be able to drive, the outcomes that our clients are looking for. So hopefully this has been informative for everybody and valuable. And you can see that we spent a lot of time on this and we're highly passionate about this. It is a holistic approach. So we do appreciate you and thank you for your time.
So I will bring it home on this last slide. I think all of us, whether it be as a part of this webinar or just over the last 18 to 24 months, know AI is inevitable. It's really about how do we get the value? How do we move quickly? Where do we start and how do we scale? And as David mentioned, we spent, the better part of almost 2 years now retooling our firm to be in a position to help clients and ourselves answer these questions. So would love to hear from anyone out there who's interested in learning more. I've listed a couple of different ways to connect. Happy to do whatever makes sense. We're all about meeting y'all where you're at. Whether it's a 30-minute exploratory call just to gain alignment and make some suggestions, or something a little deeper, a 60-minute deep dive. For those of you that are interested to learn more about our AI Accelerator platform, we scratched the surface on what it can do and would love to spend time with you and understand what it is you're trying to accomplish and how that particular platform can be utilized. And then maybe even a workshop, right? A 90-minute session, collaborative, where we're looking for use cases and using ROI and other metrics to determine what makes sense to focus on. They're all complimentary. You'll see that note at the bottom. There's no obligation. We're just here to help. And you'll see Mackenzie's contact information after that first bullet or section under primary action. That's a way to reach out and either schedule time directly on calendars and we'll meet up or send an email. We've got just a couple of minutes left. If there are any questions, now is the time to throw them in the chat. I'll wait a minute or two, and if not, we can give you a few minutes back and everyone can be on their way. But as David said, thanks so much for spending time with us. I know it can be tough to find real world examples of where organizations have used AI to find measurable benefit, and hopefully we're able to show you one here today. I don't see any other questions coming in, so everyone have a fantastic day and a great week and a great holiday next week. Thanks again for attending. Take care.
Thanks all.